Danielle completed her year 12. She was a very good student. She then went on to Melbourne University and did her degree. But unfortunately, in the meantime, her dad, who she was very close to, he had a terrible accident and was killed by a drug-affected driver who disappeared from the scene of the accident. And Danielle was very, very hurt and very upset. And she decided she'd go to the States to find her own identity rather than the daughter of. So she went to America, and I didn't know at that time, but her health was deteriorating. She was starting to lose the sight of one of her eyes, and of course she didn't want to bother me because she was that sort of young lady, very caring and kind and a beautiful person, and she decided that she wouldn't tell me. I only found out through friends that things weren't going so well over in the United States, simply because too she was protecting me. I had a very large business and my husband had just died, and I had a lot on my plate here in Melbourne. But I received a call from her kidney specialist to say that your daughter will have to go onto dialysis. So I jumped on a plane and went straight over. And I didn't realise, but prior to me arriving, two of her colleagues from university, where she was doing her master's degree in Philadelphia, they'd put up their hand and offered their kidneys, which is quite remarkable. Absolute strangers put up their hand, but they were not compatible. So as soon as I arrived there, I went straight to Mount Sinai, because what does any mother or father do? You give your life for your children. And I was discovered to be, I was compatible. So she had a couple of treatments of dialysis. And with that, I was given the green light. That was on the Saturday, the last dialysis. I was given the green light to bring her home to give her my kidney. And that was all organised at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. We were going to be met at the airport and take her straight there and have the procedure done. Well, Danielle and I departed New York. She was okay. She was reasonably good. But when we got to Los Angeles, we went to the lounge. She collapsed in the lounge and she said, "Mum, I can't go on. I really feel crook." And I said, "Darling, there's a new life for you in Melbourne." And she said, "Well, I'll try." So we put her in a wheelchair, and because I'd been given the green light, it wasn't like as if I was doing something against doctor's orders. I wouldn't have taken her with me. So we got on the plane, and about 2 hours into the flight from Los Angeles, she started thrashing around and wanting to take off her clothes, and which was most unusual. And she kept saying, "Mum, my back is hurting me. Will you rub my back?" Of course I'd rub her back. But I knew things were not right, so we called for a couple of doctors. And by the time the two doctors they got from the plane, who were on the plane, one was from South Australia and one was from Melbourne. Actually, one was a heart specialist, which is really interesting. By the time I got to her and I was holding her and rubbing her back, she gurgled and she died in my arms. And the heart specialist, he said, "There's nothing I can do. She's had an absolute massive heart attack." And I could see by the side of her face what had happened. So it's really interesting. I didn't shed a tear. I was in absolute shock. I just couldn't believe what had happened. I couldn't believe that she died. And there she lay very still. And so with that, the Qantas team were unbelievably good. They came and covered her up and made sure she had a seatbelt on and then lay her flat. And I sat next to her. I did lay next to her for a little bit. And cradled her, and I always remember it's what Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Never, never, never give up." And I said, "Darling, I'm never going to give up. I will continue this. There are too many children around the world." I mean, she was not even cold. And I thought, "You're not going to die in vain. You've suffered so much." You know, I guess the spirit was strong, but maybe the flesh was weak. She had struggled for a long time. She was one of the unlucky ones. Not everybody has this happen to them. Although it worries me terribly about our children going to bed at night and their blood glucose dropping, and we're hearing more and more often children death in bed syndrome, where they're dying in their sleep, where their blood sugar goes so low, and they go into a coma. It was very different with my daughter. She had a heart attack. Her kidneys obviously had absolutely failed. So we got back to Melbourne, and I know that Danielle would have hated a post-mortem, and Qantas, who are unbelievably good. I can't speak more highly of them. The captain radioed ahead to Sydney, whereas their medical head office, you could call it, they organised to be met by undertakers and Danielle's doctor, who was a professor at Walter and Eliza, and my brother, to meet her so that he'd been treating her in Australia. So there was no need for a post-mortem, because I know my daughter hated that, because when her dad was killed, they had to do one obviously because it was a motor vehicle accident, and she said, "Mum, never ever let that happen to me." So that was ringing in my ears. So yeah, we're the last ones off the plane. Instead of coming home with my beautiful daughter, my best friend, I came home with a deceased child, and that's when the reality hit me. She was not coming home.
How long ago was that?
14 years ago. She was 32. Next Monday, next week, Melbourne Cup Day, she would be 46. She and I were best friends. We grew up when she turned 18, both of us. We then started to really bond. I mean, up until then, I think you could say we're at loggerheads, and we were both opinionated, both strong women, but we really settled down and we became the best of friends. And I travelled to the States a fair bit because she spent 6 months here and 6 months over there, because by this time she was exhibiting in New York. We bought an apartment, I'd refurbished it. She lived in it 1 week and died. So we didn't get much joy out of that apartment. It was going to be like her home, and whenever I visited New York, it was going to be home for me too. So so 1 week we lived in that apartment. Yeah. So her memory will always be with me. It's a tragedy that's going to affect me. It is affecting me. It affects me. It's going to affect me for the rest of my life. Danielle is always with me. I'm surrounded by things of her in this office, and I think of her every day. I've got art on my wall of my office. I look at it, and I see the messages that she was trying to tell people. How tough it was. She was talented. She was kind. She was sweet. She weighed 55 kilos. People think because you've got diabetes, you're big. Well, not my daughter. She was 55 kilos. And it wasn't because she ate too many lollies or too many cakes. It's an autoimmune disease. It's a chronic disease, and it never, ever goes away. And that is why I am so committed to supporting medical research to ensure that no other family, no other child has to go through this. I've been involved now for nearly 35 years. And I recall back in the time when Danielle was diagnosed, there was very little research happening in this country, although there was some research happening in the United States and Canada where they discovered insulin. But the one thing that really has hit home with me with medical research into that type 1 is the islet transplantation, which is something I led the way, and I committed a huge sum of money to get that happening. And I went to government and asked government for funding, which they agreed to, because I think governments like to see that. They like to see you helping yourself as well, as not always asking government for money. You're actually helping yourself. So they got behind that as well, and it's a collaboration of researchers in South Australia, Melbourne and Sydney, where they collect the islets, and I believe the transplants are happening here in Melbourne. But what's really good about this program is, whilst they could only use one pancreas those 10 years ago, now one pancreas can be used for many transplants. So they're refining the procedure. The immunosuppressant drugs are not as potent as they used to be. You know, there's so much happening around the world in medical research. It's slow, it's tedious, it's painful, but it must happen, and it is happening. But what's so wonderful about it is happening in this country. And I'm a person that is always looking for answers, always looking for solutions. I'm relentless looking for solutions. and is actually happening in this country. So that is one program that's really making a difference. Yes, you can talk about technology, very important to have better blood glucose testing machines, better pumps, terrific. Pharmaceuticals are doing all of that. But to me, I'm about finding the holy grail, the cure. And if there's one thing I can do in my life before I leave this planet, is to try and make it possible and use all my energies and efforts and resources, and I can't solve everybody's problem, is to make a difference and find the cure for type 1 and make life so much easier for so many people. But in saying that, I also believe that the cure may come from other autoimmune diseases. I can remember my daughter when she was taking a particular drug to stop the proliferation of blood vessels behind her eye. She was taking a cancer drug. So who knows? We might find it from cancer research. So research is so important.
And what about the Medical Research Future Fund? What impact do you think that will have?
Well, look, I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's something that needs to happen. It will happen. I know it will. I know the government are committed to it, and I'm sure both sides are committed to it. It has to happen. I mean, it's costing the Australian community, I think, about $3 billion a year. I mean, I've just finished my term on the National Diabetes Strategy Committee. We were appointed by the Health Minister to advise government on going forward with diabetes. And I just could not believe the amount of complications there are in this country to do with the disease. Kidney, heart, eyes. I mean, and the Aboriginal community is just an explosion up there, the Aboriginal community. I saw statistics I did not know ever existed, and it frightened me. It's a no-brainer. We must do it. It is so important for the well-being of the Australian community. It's, you know, we've got some of the brightest researchers in the world in this country. We're going to lose them if we don't support them. And I travel around all the time. I've got an interest in medical research. I visit institutes. I research researchers, constantly asking questions. And there's some great stuff happening. You know, I was up in Canberra recently and I saw some cancer work that they were doing. And it was a drug that they were using, which it could be the catalyst to finding a cure for cancer. I mean, myself, I've had cancer. I've had heart disease, open heart surgery. I've had 5 blockages. I wouldn't be here talking today if it were not for the medical researchers. I would be dead. I was given a 50-50 chance of survival when I was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago. I went through the operation, chemo, radiation, and then, of course, open heart surgery. If we didn't have investment in those researchers, I, like many Australians, would be dead. And I've got too much to offer this country, as have many other people. We've got to look after our own.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, Sue?
It's only women's football, but that's
slightly off topic.
It's slightly off topic. You know, look, I'm relentless. When I got into this position of supporting medical research, I was a very busy businesswoman, and I still am. But I realised there's more to life than just business. There's more to giving back. And when you're in a position to give back, you should be giving back. I'm a person that doesn't believe in taking it to the cemetery. I want to make a difference now. I want to see it happen now. I know that I have made a small difference. It's incredibly satisfying to know that I've done something and I've encouraged others to follow. And if there's one thing that I feel very proud about in medical research, and we talk about the Future Fund, we've got politicians sitting up, listening, wanting it to happen, needs to happen, they know it needs to happen. It was interesting a couple of years ago when our Prime Minister at the time was going to pull back on medical research funding. Have you ever seen researchers in white coats ever before protesting against that. I mean, that took a lot for those researchers to get out there on the streets and protest, and I was right behind them, because it's not just ensures their work and their jobs, that's fine, but I mean, it's for the well-being and for the health of the community of this country, and we're a bright country. So, you know, if there's one thing I would like to see, I've made a difference to people's lives, and when I pass on, I know that I've had a fulfilling life, and I have made a difference, and I have encouraged other people to follow.